Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Kintone Developer Program tutorial. My name is Sean, working here with Kintone today, and we are going to be creating our own IPaaS, IPaaS, Integration Platform as a Service, using Kintone and AWS Lambda and AWS API Gateway. This, if you're not familiar with it, IPaaS, or Integration Platforms as a Service, it's webhook handlers, right? If you've ever heard the term Webhook, right? Or maybe you've heard of services such as make.com or their old name Integromat, or if you've heard of Zapier, for example, or if you've ever used them in the past. We are going to be generating a webhook from our own personal Kintone subdomain. Today we'll be making a t-shirt shop, and when we add a new t-shirt to our store, we're going to just send that data along to AWS. We won't be doing anything with the data there. That's up for you to decide. But this should be a really good starting point for you to build out this webhook handler. So let's get started. And the first thing that you might want to know is what exactly is a webhook and why is it special? And it's not actually special. If you're just starting out with web development and coding, you probably have done API requests, right? You've done some fetch requests and you've gotten information from outside services. And maybe in those fetch requests, you've done GET requests or POST requests, put different methods, right? And a webhook is just a POST request, almost always, and it has some kind of informational body attached to it. And it is sent out when an event happens. An event is exactly what its name implies. For example, with our t-shirt shop, an event would be when we add a new t-shirt to our t-shirt shop and we save that into the database. That's a save event, right? Or if someone registers as a user on our store, that could be an event, for example. Or when someone checks out, right, in the cart and they check out and they actually buy a t-shirt, right? That could be an event. And the idea behind webhooks is that they happen once when some kind of event happens, and then it sends, some data along to a specific endpoint or a place that you specify. So it really is just it's all HTTP requests, specifically a POST request that we're going to be working with today. And what is Kintone? Just as a quick introduction before we actually do this, you will at the end of this, by the end of this video, have your own Kintone personal subdomain that is free, as in really actually free. And Kintone is a low-code way to create groupware and create databases, tables for you to work with either yourself or with an organization. You can just drag and drop. And what this is equivalent to is creating a new column in a MySQL table or database, right? And we'll be going through how to do this together. And we'll be making our own t-shirt shop example. That'll be our backend today. And we'll also be using AWS. Specifically, we'll be creating a Kintone Webhook Receiver Lambda function and connecting that to an API Gateway. So if you're new to this, definitely check those parts out. And we'll also, in the end, be talking a little bit about security and some security concerns and how to think about security a little bit as a developer. And we'll also be creating a authorizer for our webhook handler, and that will also be the later half of this video. The first thing that we should do, though, if you don't have one already, is you should get your own Kintone subdomain, right? And if you go to kintone.dev, you will see here is our API documentation website, and you can either go to kintone.dev/new, right here. We just have a nice little redirect for you, or you can scroll down to the bottom and it says get a developer license. And what a developer license is, it is free, as in we do not ask for your credit card information or anything like that always. And it is also almost entirely fully featured and is your own personal Kintone subdomain that you can use to practice coding. You can use to develop things. You're not allowed to go out and run a business with it or make money, for example. In that case, we want you to buy it. But for practicing coding and going through with tutorials or using as a quick backend, I really do enjoy using it. And it's also free, as in freedom. We don't sell your information to third parties, and we don't spam you with lots of email stuff. We do send out an email once every 2 weeks or so. And that email is basically content that we're creating. For example, this YouTube video will tell you like, hey, we have a new tutorial, for example, right? And or maybe, hey, we have a new article on our webpage showing how to integrate with all kinds of different things. So if you're interested in practicing your coding skills, then please check those out. So let's go back to our registration form, and we just ask you for a little bit of information. Please give us your first name, last name, and an email. It does have to be a valid email address because this email address will be where the authorization email gets sent to. And also this email will be your login name when you first have your Kintone subdomain. So do remember that. And if you give us a little bit of information about yourself, then that'll help us create more content in the future, right? The last thing that people get caught up in is this subdomain part. And in my own personal Kintone subdomain, you can see it's very small, but I have sean.kintone.com, and that is what you will put right here. I put Sean in here all those years ago, and it'll say this is not available, but of course, Sean is great, is unfortunately still available, but you get the idea. This will be what's before the .kintone.com portion. And go ahead and agree to the terms of service and privacy policy. Basically, don't spam API calls. If you are running hundreds of thousands of API calls, we might say, okay, calm down a little bit. But other than that, please use this for practicing your coding skills and working with a backend that's really easy to set up. You'll see that we set up our t-shirt shop database in maybe 2 minutes, 3 minutes in the middle of this video. It's pretty powerful. I enjoy using it. After you get your email and click on the link inside, you'll be greeted with the login screen, something like this. And remember that your username will be your email when you first sign in. I've changed my username, and you can do up here in the administration part. And then click on Kintone, and you will be greeted with your portal. It'll be something similar to this with different backgrounds and stuff, but you get the idea, right? And if you want more information about like how to work with Kintone, or like you don't want to like immediately jump in with today's tutorial, creating your backend, definitely check out our other videos and the ones that I have linked in the description of this video for more information on that. We need a place for our data and our webhook events to origin from. So we're going to go over here to apps, click on plus, create app from scratch. And today I said we're going to be doing a t-shirt shop. Sure, whatever. So we'll do our t-shirt shop. And what do our t-shirts have? Our t-shirts will have a ID that we're just going to do as a string for now. So we'll have ID. And just as a habit, I always change the field code to match my title. And this is columns in your database. We have a lot of videos that I will also link in the description about what is Kintone and like how do the databases in it work. But this is just creating a new column in your database called ID. And we'll refer to it in our code as ID if we need to. And let's see, our t-shirts also have a color. Sure. Our t-shirts have a name. So we'll just do a name right there. And we'll do, it doesn't really matter. This is just for proof of concept. We'll do a color of our t-shirts, right? And it'll be blue and purple. How about? Sure. And I'll change that to color as well. Go ahead and click on Activate App, and you will see that we have a new empty table, a new empty database for our t-shirts. You can click on the plus sign up here, and t-shirt number 1, cool t-shirt, and it's blue. And you can see that we have a record in our database. We go back to the index of our database, and there's our record. Sure, I'll do another one. Why not? And t-shirt number 2 is going to be interesting t-shirts, and this one will be purple. Being able to come up with silly prototype ideas like this is a very valuable programming skill, actually. So usually I have a go-to like t-shirt shop or coffee shop locations or something like that. It really increases like the speed of your development, and as you program more and more, you know, in your coding journey, you'll get used to doing silly things like this. So we have data in our database, and we're going to go and first we're going to create our Webhook Receiver and its API endpoint over on AWS. And then we're going to connect the two, and we're going to show you how that works. And then we'll talk a little bit about security and some security practices that you can integrate with your sending of your webhooks. And then we will finish up and show you the finished workflow, for example, and how I can receive this new record data in AWS. I'm not going to go through the making an account and stuff like that. I don't work there, right? And it's fairly common, but they have a fairly generous free tier that we can use today. And you can just sign in using that. And today we'll be working in the US East region. So always make sure that your region matches. I know I've been caught in the past where I make something in the Japan region and then I change regions. And then a week later, I'm like, oh, where's all my stuff? Always be careful about the region. And we're going to just navigate over here. If you don't have it in recently visited, click this little super menu up here and just type Lambda. Run code without thinking about servers. Yeah, sure. And I have one that I made a long time ago already. And you will have probably nothing in here. And the first thing that we're going to do is click on create function over here. And what this is going to be like when you send an HTTP request, AKR, Kintone Webhook, to this server, it's going to take in that data and then we can just log it to the console for now. We're not going to be like doing anything with it in today's tutorial. That's up to you what you want to do with it. But it should be a good starting point for you. So we're going to click on create function. We'll author from scratch with a simple hello world example. And mine is going to be Kintone Webhook Receiver, I before E except after C, right? Kintone Webhook Receiver. And we're going to be doing this in JavaScript today, just so you know. Everything else should be fine just as a default and go down to create function. And this will spit out a very basic JavaScript template for us. All right, very cool. It has created the Kintone Webhook Receiver. And you can now change its code and configuration, and to invoke your function with a test event, choose test. Okay, seems good. So if you're not used to the AWS common, you'll see we're in this Lambda functions, and then here's the name of our function that's going to run. And if you scroll down just a little bit, you can also edit the code right here in the console if you want to. Most people will probably have this code on your local machine and you'll edit in VS Code and then you'll use some kind of tool to upload it to AWS. For today's tutorial, we're not going to be doing anything cool like that, just copying, pasting into VS Code and hitting the deploy button over here. And so what do we get right off the bat, right, with our kind of basic hello world template? We have this handler function right here and it takes in some kind of event. Oh, there's a big hint, right? And it just immediately gives a response of 200. That's an okay response. And it'll just say hello from Lambda, right? And you can go to the test tab right here. And it creates like a test event for you right here, 1, 2, 3. And if you click on test, and this is always just a good habit because it also creates the logs for you. If you click on logs, I have a lot of logs from my old tutorial, but you can see right here at our time, it should say that we got an event in here. Yeah, and that's fine. Cool. So that's working. We have our logs right up here working. And now what we're going to do, I've been signed out. Let's close that. What we're going to do now is work on integrating this more with AWS. And so the first thing that we want to do is we want to turn this into an API. We want to be able to access this from not just hitting tests on the console. And there's a couple ways to go about this, and you can get lost easily. I know I have in going through the AWS forest, so to speak, right? There's a lot going on in here. But I'd like to do it with this add trigger button just for now. That seems fine. And what is our source? We'll do API Gateway, right? An API Gateway is another service on AWS that will allow you to create API endpoints. And there's lots of different options for you. Today, for our simple use case, we're just going to be doing an HTTP API. And you can see something here called security, and we'll talk about this later. For now, we're just going to do open, right? But we're going to be securing it later as best we can for our webhook origin. And additional settings, it doesn't really matter. You can do some other stuff, but we're not going to be using any of this right now. So go ahead and click the add button that I'm hiding should spin. All right, so we now have our API Gateway. And if we click on it right here, it'll say that we have this API endpoint. And you can copy this right now, or just click on it, really. And it'll say hello from Lambda, right? That's what was in our code. If you use Postman, for example, in order to test your APIs, you can paste that into Postman, big fan. And you can use that to send a request. And this time we're sending a GET request. But our webhooks that we send from Kintone, they are going to need to be post requests, right? Because they're going to have a body of data going with them. So we're going to be doing a post request. And you'll notice that we can also do a post request here, and it'll still say hello from Lambda. If you want to secure this in the future, right now you can change the method. Right now it's any, but you can change that, for example, to only accept post methods, for example. For now, we're just going to leave this as is, but it's more conventional practice to have it be a post route. And if you want to check out the details of this, go ahead and click on this API Gateway part of this Kintone Webhook Receiver API. It should load that up right there. And you can see this API endpoint right here. It's on the this default part. This default is the version of the API. For example, if it's a test or production, for example, the stage. And right now we just have it as default. And when you have it as default, it also automatically will update for you. You don't have to click the deploy button up here. It'll just say auto deploy. That's very nice. So you can click on the route here and it'll get you some information, which is really nice. This authorization part, we're going to be talking about that. It's saying in not big red letters, but it is saying routes with no authorization attached are open. And that means that you all watching the video as well, not that I haven't already deleted this, but you can also, for example, enter in this URL right over here, right? And you could also get a nice hello from Lambda response if you wanted. That's fine for our test, but we actually wouldn't want our super secret t-shirt information being leaked out of our store, right? So we're going to be doing some authorizing later, but for now, also you can check here this integration part. This is telling you that we have connected this Lambda, the Kintone Webhook Receiver, and it gives us an ID or something like that, to this API. And that's a really easy way to do it. There's actually a lot of ways. You could create the API first and then click connect integration or like integrate also. There's a lot of different ways to go about that. All right, so we have here our webhook receiver. We have our route. Let's go ahead and try and send a webhook, okay? So we're going to make one quick edit to our Lambda code here just to make sure that it's working. Also, we're going to try and log out some webhook data as well, right? So I'm going to get rid of this to-do real quick. And I don't have this memorized or anything. I have it written down next to me just because why would I memorize this? But we have here in our event, the first thing that we're just going to do just to make sure everything is working right is we're going to console.log that event. And then let's see, we can also, for example, check out our event body, the data that's getting sent along with our event. So we can also console.log right here. And we're going to say event body data or webhook data. And then we're also going to do right here, we're going to first parse that webhook data because it's coming in as JSON, right? So I'm going to make a const right here. We'll say body is equal to JSON dot parse. Oh, that's nice. And then we will have our event dot body. And then we can, for example, log it to the console by stringifying it again, right? So we'll do JSON dot stringify, and then we'll do body. And I forget the properties of that. String, value, undefined, space. Yeah, we'll do null and then 2. Yeah, that's usually good. And for now, we can just do this and still return 200. And I clicked on deploy, and you should see updating. It's successfully updated. All right, so now that our changes have been deployed, let's go ahead and try and connect this to Kintone via Webhook. And if you click on this API Gateway button right there, it'll actually tell you the API endpoint that is directly associated with this Lambda. That's very convenient. So go ahead and copy that. And we're going to go back to our t-shirt shop. And to add a webhook endpoint to Kintone is really easy. Just go to this cogwheel up here for this app, this database, this table, and click on App Settings. Go to Webhooks and add a webhook. Yeah, that makes sense. And we'll call this our new t-shirt added webhook. And here in the endpoint, there's already an HTTPS right there. So if you copy the HTTPS portion of your API endpoint, go ahead and delete that. And we will put in here our API Gateway endpoint on the default route, or the default stages, the Kintone Webhook Receiver route, which has a type of, a method of any, actually. If you click on here, we have some events. Record is added. That's what we'll be using today. Edited, deleted, comment is posted. These are all fairly self-explanatory. Let's say if I actually had a real large t-shirt shop, I wouldn't just add a t-shirt and then immediately have a bunch of code run, because that could, I could have mistyped something, or my silly coworker could have added a pair of pants. I don't know. So you have process management, and when you enable that, for example, you can add the record, and then there'll be a button at the top of that record, and it could say like deploy to AWS or something, right? And then you can click that, and it'll move the process over to my coworker for them to check, and then they can click deploy or something like that, right? It's very powerful, but we're not going to be using that today. Just simply record is added. Click on this save button that I have behind me right here, and it tells you to go back and click on update app as well. So go ahead and click on that. And let's try and add a new t-shirt. Why not? I'll just do number 4, 3, I forget. And this one's going to be a fancy new t-shirt. And this one's going to be purple, sure. And when I click save right here, there'll be no feedback, right? It's just sending off data to that endpoint that I wanted to. If you wanted to check if the endpoint is valid, or if it actually returns some kind of value to it, you can click on webhooks here. And we got a check mark next to this webhook. That means that at least it was sent successfully. It wasn't like 404 forward or a 500 error or something didn't come back, right? So we can go ahead and check on our logs. If you go back into your Lambda, if you still have that tab open, go click on CloudWatch, or just go to the monitor tab right here and click on view CloudWatch logs. And you can see this latest event up here at the top. Sometimes it does take a little bit of time for them to appear, but I'm going to move slightly out of the way. And you can see that we've logged our event itself, which is very cool, right? So you can see like that nitty-gritty HTTP info right here. And you can see the request as well. Notice that it's a post request, like how I mentioned earlier. And if you go down, it also has the body right here, and we logged that out just as stringified JSON. You can see here that our add record event has fired, and we have sent it from this app called T-shirt Shop, and here's the record that we have added. And it has a bunch of fields in there, like the color, which is purple, for example, the record number, so that's like your database key, right? And we have the name of our t-shirt, etc., who created it, all kinds of useful data. And as you add more fields to Kintone, for example, maybe you want to improve your t-shirt's experience, you can click on this cogwheel up here, and maybe we could add a picture of the t-shirt, which you could get using our get images API. It's a two-step process. Or you could add a date time, you could add a price, you could add all kinds of stuff, right? And doing it with no code makes prototyping for your kind of proof of concept or practicing your coding skills really easy, which I like. I don't like creating, right, database tables and columns and checking the types and stuff like that by hand. I can do it. I don't want to waste time doing it. I love using Kintone for that. That's nice. So now that we're receiving our data properly, let's think about what else we want to do. We did it here with the add record API, and we don't have any, for example, like error handling or anything like that in our code. So you could definitely improve on that. But also right now, this API, this webhook is wide open on the internet, like I was talking about earlier. And while it doesn't have any extremely sensitive, valuable information, anybody with access to this API endpoint could figure out what to do and how to get data, or maybe send fake data to your other integration that you're working with if you've connected this Lambda to something else, right? Or if you're processing a fetch request inside of your Lambda. And another thing that I like to talk about for like new coders or people that are just starting to get used to thinking about security is notice how I said anybody with this URL. Thinking in terms of anybody, any person is also a kind of trap in today's web development world, right? You have to think of any bot or any machine in that this URL, while any person is not very likely to go off and guess it just randomly, for a bot, everything from here, from the HTTPS/ to the .execute API is not known to the bot, but everything over here is fairly easily guessed by the bot. This default part, we've left it as default, so that'll probably be the first thing that any bot tries. And then this string over here, while it's long, it's made up of words, right? And anyone with a dictionary and using common kind of words will try and access this API endpoint. And they can do it quite easily as things are right now. From a security standpoint, it's difficult to secure these kinds of things properly. And so if you're going to be doing like really sensitive data, right, you're going to definitely want to think hard about how you're going to secure your API endpoints and your webhook data this time. And one thing that we can do with Kintone is we could try and implement our own kind of API key for our webhook data, right? And there's a couple of ways that we could do that. And we're going to talk about what a AWS Lambda Authorizer, or AWS API Gateway Authorizer is right now. And an authorizer is kind of what it implies in the name. If you go to API Gateway, if you go to that route, and specifically the route that your Lambda is connected to, you will actually see over here authorization. Authorizers protect your API against unauthorized agents, right? And it says attach authorization. Sure, sounds easy. And you can select a existing one. I don't really have any. You can do this IAM, which means that you would need to send some AWS credentials or perhaps log in with SSO. I've never actually touched that one. You could also click on create and attach. Sure, sounds good. And you have two choices. This one using JSON Web Tokens, so you know that's very new. We're making this video in 2025, and JSON Web Tokens are still quite popular, although no one quite knows exactly why they want to use them. Maybe they're just using them just because. But you can use JSON Web Tokens to control access to your API, or you can use a Lambda function to control access to your API. The JSON Web Token, you would, in your code, if you are, for example, sending this webhook data from your own code base and not from Kintone, you could use the JSON Web Token package or functions built in to Node and to the browser environment to create a JSON Web Token. And what a JSON Web Token is a token, and please comment if I get this wrong, it is able to be read. So there's data encrypted. You'll just see like a large string of like numbers and letters. In fact, I think if you go to JWT.io is a good website. Basically, you'll see like this long string of numbers and letters, right? And these are hashed or secreted values that correspond to certain headers and payloads. And it's a standardized format. And so you are able to see in this kind of pinkish area that this is a JWT, JSON Web Token, and it's hashed with HS256. I'm not a security expert, so I don't know, for example, if one of these is like really good or not. Look it up yourself. And this payload data as well is also able to be decrypted. And this is decryptable by anyone, any machine, anytime, which is the point of it. You want to be able to get some data out of it. But there is also a secret or a signature. And if I were to type in my cool signature, this signature is not able to be decrypted. Otherwise, what's the point of it being secret? But it is able to be used in order to decrypt the other information in here, which is what makes JSON Web Tokens very powerful. You can add more things in here. You could also add, for example, an expiration date, and it's unable to be edited, right? Which means that once you set an expiration date in here, you can easily verify if this JSON Web Token is actually expired or not. It's a very cool technology. Unfortunately, you need to be able to produce these with code. If I were to just copy and paste this one right now, I could, and it doesn't have an expiration date right now. So I could, for example, attach this as like a query parameter to our webhook. And with Kintone, the way that you would send extra data is with query parameters. You'll notice that right here we have the Kintone Webhook Receiver as our URL. I could try and do something like this. We're going to add a question mark, and we'll say t is equal to. We don't need to go this far, basically, right? And also, if you go into the AWS JWT, we're just going to click on it real quick just to show you. You're only able to find them in the authorization header. And when you are sending webhooks from Kintone, you're not able to edit the header. We are able to add these query parameters, and that's how we're going to be doing it. But we cannot just change the header of our request, right? And so that means that we have to use our other option up here. And this is good practice anyways. We are going to use a Lambda function to control access to our API. And this is where you could use other kind of Node or JavaScript environment packages for authorization. There's a lot out there. Authorization is a very common practice and fairly easy to set up. We're going to do a very simple key check. And security-wise, what this is going to prevent brute forcing and bots finding our API endpoint. Remember how I said that if you look at our URL, if you really examine it, I'll go down here to routes real quick. I'll show you right here because this is a little bit easier to understand. This part right here before our subdomain, right before the execute API, this is a randomized string, or we could not randomize it. And everything after this slash right here is also unknown or quote unquote randomized, but not really, to the attacking bot. And these words right here are common English words, so they're fairly easily guessable. But as you add more and more, let's say if our API endpoint, I'm just going to create one. What if instead of Kintone Webhook Receiver, what if it was Kintone Webhook Receiver? And then we did like this would become much, much more difficult, right, for any kind of bot or something to brute force, which makes it a little bit more secure as well. And it's still out there on the web. But you could also, for example, go about it another way that's a little bit more smart, so you don't have to have this really like giga-long URL. You could also, for example, set up this authorizer. And this authorizer can check for different things. It can check, for example, if your request is coming from your Kintone subdomain, right? Which is nice that you have your own subdomain that you can control by yourself. So good job, Kintone. You can also check for a secret API token or key, which is of sufficient length, and that's also fairly good security. And so we're going to do that here today. So if we go to our authorizer, it's going to ask us which Lambda do you want to attach? And we haven't created one yet. So we're going to first create one, and then we'll come back to this screen, and we will attach that to our route. So now let's go back to our functions page up here. I'm just going to open up a new tab. And we're going to once again go create function, author from scratch. And this one will be called our Kintone Webhook Authorizer. And once again, this one's going to just be JavaScript, and we're going to keep everything default. Click on that create function button behind me once again. All right. So we have our new default function up here. And it has been updated or deployed in another editor. Sure, if you say so. And you can see right here that we have, again, a default index.mjs, right? That's just saying, hey, return 200 already. And there's lots of documentation about, if you just type in API Gateway Authorizer, you might see my old Google stuff when I was studying this in order to make this video. And they give you a bunch of stuff, blah, 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 blah. But basically, your authorizer can return either one of two kind of ways to authenticate. And one thing that they can do is return just a simple Boolean value of true or false. Is it okay? Yes or no? And that's one way to go about it. The way that I chose to do it, and it's in here down, I think it's their best practices right here. The AWS integrates really well with these IAM policies. Their integration with their authorization system called IAM is really good, and it's useful to and good practice to use it. So what you will do is create like a policy saying this person is allowed to make this API request, okay, and you will return that response from your authorizer. It's very cool. So we're going to do that, and we're not going to be taking anything from the headers because we cannot edit the headers of Kintone. We are instead going to be looking at our query string parameters up here. This is a big hint right here in the documentation. So if we go over to our authorizer, and I don't have this code memorized or anything. I'm going to take a look at here, and we'll go through this line by line. But once again, you have your handler, right? This is common for syntax for Lambdas. And the first thing I do is log the event just as fun practice. And this time our API key, our very secure API key is going to be 123. Wow, very cool. And we're also going to try and get the API key from our headers. So what we're going to do up here is we're going to look at our query params right here. And this is event.queryStringParameters. And just to prevent errors, we're going to say otherwise it's nothing. And if it's nothing, then that's also going to return false. And our API key is going to be equal to queryparams.key is what I named it. So what that's going to correspond to, if you're used to URL and HTTP requests, is here in our Kintone Webhook endpoint. After Kintone Webhook Receiver, you're going to put a question mark to signal that we are going to put in some URL query parameters, and we're going to type in key. This time we named it key, and then key is equal to 1, 2, 3, right there. Go ahead and click on Save and Update Apps, and you can change that key as you need to, of course. You should change that key. And we are going to now go back to our authorizer code right here in VS Code. So we are expecting the code key 123. We are going to get the query params from our URL, our request, and we're going to take query params.key is going to be equal to API key. Yes. And this other part is AWS syntax that I took from this documentation right here. But what it is going to say, okay, allow this event where this is happening to occur on this kind of AWS portion, right? So in this case, our ARN is going to be our API Gateway route, and we're just going to allow it on the route ARN. This is also all from the template that I was looking at earlier. And then this is a very simple, right? In the end, all authentication, right, is pretty much just if statements, right? If our key is equal to our expected key, then we're going to run this function called generate policy and say they are allowed to run code or use that method on our API gateway. Otherwise, you are going to deny them and create a deny request. What is generate policy? This is also taken from the documentary, but it's going to basically create an object and it says, okay, here is who this person is, a thing called a policy document, which is what AWS is looking for. And it just says this version part is always like a really old date. I'm not quite sure what that is. But basically, they are allowed to execute this API. They're allowed to invoke this API. And they are either allowed to or denied to. That's what the effect part is. And then here's what the resource is. It's, a special way of going about it. It's not exactly JavaScript, right? This is like AWS JavaScript. So it does take a little bit of time to get used to it. That being said, being able to just look things up is a fantastic skill, right? In web development. And that is exactly what I did. I wouldn't come up with this on my own, right? I go to the docs and I go and copy paste and I read the docs, right? So now that we have this code right up here, I'm going to copy and paste this into our authorizer. Make sure that you have the authorizer, that you're not accidentally copy and pasting into the receiver. Just going to go down here. And we are going to deploy. Always make sure you deploy your changes. And if you were to run test on this one, it'll say, hey, you don't have an API key at all, right? Because our test event is sending not as a query parameter, but is sending as a post body, right? So that's not going to work. But now that we have our authorizer code set up, let's go ahead and connect it to our Webhook receiver. And just as a quick test, we can go over here to our receiver, click on attach authorization. We're going to create and attach one. Use a Lambda function to control access to your API. We will call this Kintone Webhook Authorizer. It is in the US East region for me. And let's see what we have. We have our Webhook Authorizer. We have my Twitter poster thing that I tried to make. And then we have our Webhook Receiver. Obviously, we want our authorizer to be the authorizer. And here, also be careful. This is what I was talking about earlier with returning a simple Boolean, right? Of is it okay, yes or no, true or false? And we are actually returning an IAM policy, which is more secure, and it is what the documentation recommends. I'm going to do that. And here in our identity sources, we need to change what this identity source is. Right now, it's saying like, hey, where is your authentication information? Like, is it in the header? And that's what the default is for a lot of things, right? You send them in the header of your request. We can't do that. We're going to be sending it in our query params. So I'm going to go back to that. So our request here is what the identity source is trying to say is where is your authorization information coming from? And normally it's in the header of your request, right? Normally we send our API tokens and stuff and our bearer tokens in the header, right, under the capital A authorization key. But we're not able to do that. And so we are actually going to change this out for the request query string. And what that is going to be, just like up here in this URL, right, we have query strings after the question mark. Our query strings key is going to be where our super secret API key is going to be hiding. And so go back down here, grant it permissions, sure. It says attach behind me, so I'll go ahead and click that. Maybe next time I make a video on AWS, I will stand on the left side of the screen instead. And it says that it is attached, right? And so if we go back to our Postman, right, where we were testing out our Lambda earlier, we don't have any kind of key attached. And if I click send, it'll say unauthorized, which is very cool, right? And let's go ahead and click question mark key equals 123. In Postman, you could also just do this in like a query params right here if you want to type it right here. Click on send. And it'll say internal server because we also don't have a body going with it, but it did say unauthorized. So let's go ahead and test this out on Kintone instead in our t-shirt shop. I'm just going to double check that our URL is correct for our webhook. Question mark key is equal to 123. All right, looks good to me. And we're going to create a new t-shirt. A new t-shirt just dropped. Bros. And this one's going to be purple as well. I click on save. And let's go see if it shows up in our logs. So we'll go to our Webhook Receiver. Click on monitor. Once again, get rid of that. There we go. So in our monitor, you can see earlier that we had our error, right? Because we didn't send a request body with it. So obviously, if you were going to build out on this solution today, then you would have to, do some error handling, stuff like that. Forgive me, it's a little bit out of the scope of today's tutorial. But if you go down to our second event right here, our event body data is properly picked up with our new authentication, our new authorizer in AWS. And so you have created your own version of a iPaaS integration platform as a service, make.com or Zapier. There's many such services. And right now you have access to this event data. And this will run every time you add a new t-shirt to your shop, right? And building out on this is a fantastic project, especially for new coders if you're trying to work on your JavaScript skills, if you're trying to build out that coding portfolio, maybe try and get a job in the industry. I highly recommend working with webhooks and working with existing platforms and saying, hey, I customized this platform to do XYZ, right? It shows a sense of not just like building random web apps, but also taking things that people actually use, Kintone, Salesforce, other Slack, all kinds of different services out there. And building upon them is a great way to show your skills and also say that you are looking for services that people are actually using, right? So I think that's a really good way to go about that. We are done here today, and thank you for listening to the end, as always. Today we have made our own AWS integration platform as a service, our own kind of make.com clone. That being said, services such as Make and Zapier are still extremely powerful and valuable. And if you want to think as an engineer about, for example, let's say you wanted to integrate further, like you wanted to take this t-shirt data and then send a WhatsApp message to all of your users that there's a new t-shirt, for example. Okay, so you code out that example. And then maybe you also want to take that t-shirt data and you want to notify your suppliers that you sold the t-shirt, and then you need to request more stock, for example. And the real power of these kind of platforms, and where you end up wanting to pay money for them, is if you need to connect multiple things to one event, and your complexity of your app starts to grow and grow, right? So I do really appreciate make.com. I do appreciate Zapier a lot, but I think that it's a good practice, right, to just handle webhooks yourself and really understand what's going on behind the scenes, right? So I hope that you enjoyed this JavaScript tutorial. Once again, I'm Sean with Kintone, and if you're interested in Kintone, please check out some of our other videos that we have on kintone.dev as well. We have all kinds of API information for you to try and work with our APIs, use our Kintone as a web database, for example, or if you want to code directly in Kintone. It's really powerful and fun, and I definitely enjoy doing all this. So thank you for today, and see you next time. Bye.